In the past two videos, you have learned about how our human emotions work and why some people seem to lack emotions altogether. This video looks deeper into the reasons why some people feel emotions in different ways due to various factors, including age, sex, and IQ. The most common measure of how people feel emotion is through emotional intelligence, frequently referred to as EQ. The EQ spectrum was introduced in 1990 by psychologists Salovey and Mayer, and has been used ever since. In general, someone's emotional intelligence can tell us how they react to various emotional stimuli. So how does the way women feel differ from the way men feel? Anatomically, there have been many differences observed in the brain structures of men and women. It has been found that women have a larger hippocampus and more white matter, which are responsible for connectivity through the brain. Women have also, interestingly, been found to have verbal centers on both sides of their brain, whereas men have only one on the left. Men, on the other hand, have more than 7 times the gray matter that women have. Gray matter in the brain is responsible for processing and holding information. Testosterone in the man's brain has also been linked to lower levels of oxytocin, which you learned about in video number 1. More abstractly, one study looked to compare the emotions of men and women by measuring them on 4 EQ scales: fantasy, perspective taking, empathic concern, and personal distress. Over 1,000 men and 1,000 women participated in the study, which concluded that women reacted with greater emotional response than men in all 4 categories. Despite this, it is important to remember that there are exceptions to every gender rule, and that while certain emotional reactions may have scientific correlation to one's sex, it doesn't mean that it is exclusive to either men or women. A second factor that has been thought to correlate with emotions is age. Surely you've noticed that as you've gotten older, you began to feel different emotions to various stimuli. Curiously, much like IQ, it has been found that one's EQ also holds relatively steady over time. However, with any kind of maturity, there is also emotional maturity. This is why adults don't have tantrums like young children, and why teenagers may be more prone to argumentative behavior. The change in emotional reaction can also be due to a change in the way that object is seen. Like discussed in video number 1, as we get older, our emotional valence to many objects changes due to our increased number of experiences. As we gather more of the same types of experiences, we become more able to average these experiences into a single reaction. This is also why people can become emotionally numb or detached from an emotional reaction after a stimulus has been experienced a number of times. A third main factor that may influence emotional intelligence is intellect and traditional intelligence. Of course, there is always some controversy in regard to the accuracy of IQ testing, but it is the most widely used measure of intelligence in the world and will therefore serve as the basis for this comparison. There have been numerous studies to compare IQ and EQ, and surprisingly, scientists have actually found very little correlation between the two independent variables. One study from the University of South Florida looked to find any correlation between EQ, IQ, and academic performance. The study concluded that the most successful students academically actually have average IQ scores. Further, it found that the best academic students are the students with the highest levels of emotional intelligence. There have been similar studies which have come to similar conclusions in that success is determined much more by our emotional intelligence than our IQ. For example, relating back to the previous videos, prisoners with psychopathic tendencies have been found to have very high IQ scores, but extremely low levels of emotional intelligence. These findings have led researchers to hypothesize that IQ may be entirely obsolete now that EQ can be quantified and read. Fun fact, psychologist Daniel Goleman performed a research project to determine the emotional intelligence of US presidents. He found that presidents with high EQ have been much more successful than presidents with lower emotional intelligence. Which president do you think had the highest estimated EQ? His conclusion was none other than President Franklin D. Roosevelt. To summarize, our emotions are highly dependent on the factors around us. For the most part, they are highly scientific in nature, but occasionally there are pieces of our emotions which have yet to be explained. But that's part of the mystery. This has been my second semester independent study project. I hope you have all enjoyed this project and now know a little bit more about your emotions and feel better about your feelings.